Hi, everyone, and welcome to my show called We Were Lied to About 9/11. I am your host, John Gold, and this show is part of the Soapbox People's Network. This week, we're going to talk with someone who has a far reaching voice that has a history of advocating for 9/11 justice and how that advocacy was used against them in an effort to discredit them. A big problem that causes others with a voice not to speak out about the lies of 9/11.
Hi, this is John, and I'm here with Abby Martin. Abby, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, thank you very much for being on today. All right, so I'm going to read your bio for everyone. Abby Martin is an American journalist and former host of Breaking the Set on the RT America Network, working from the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Before hosting her show, she had worked for 2 years as a correspondent for RT America. Martin is also an artist and activist and helped found the citizen journalism website Media Roots. She serves on the board of directors for the Media Freedom Foundation, which manages Project Censor. Martin appeared in the documentary film Project Censored, the movie Ending the Reign of Junk Food News, which came out in 2013, and co-directed 99%, the Occupy Wall Street collaborative film, which came out in 2013. That's her regular bio. Now, I wrote a little personal bio for Abby, and I'm going to read that now. It says, I remember when she first came into the 9/11 Truth movement. There's a picture of her on a corner holding a sign that says, Google 9/11 Truth. She helped to found San Diego 9/11 Truth, and I always thought that they were one of the better 9/11 Truth groups in the country. I remember them posting a video where they talked a lot about the families, and I was very proud of them. Over the years, I have seen Abby grow as an individual and as an activist. I remember when she smashed her first television and was doing news segments while she was working for YourNetwork.tv. I remember when she started Media Roots. I remember her footage of what took place in Oakland, and I remember when she was first hired by RT. I've known her for years and sadly have only met her once and very briefly. I want everyone to know that she has an enormous heart, a great mind, and she is an excellent speaker. I want her to know that I am extremely proud of her for her many accomplishments.
John! That's so sweet. You're going to make me cry. That's very, very nice, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for everything you've done. All right, so we're going to get right into the questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What was the day of 9/11 like for you?
It was a horrible day, like it was for everyone. I was in college. I was a junior, I think, and I was in my art class, Miss Janiko's art class, and I just remember the TV turned on and we just saw these buildings burning, and it was just shocking. Everyone just didn't know what was going on. It felt like, I remember listening to Howard Stern that day too, and he was just like, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world. Of course, he was also saying, let's, nuke Palestine, which I didn't really catch the first time around. My brother showed me that later on. I mean, he was just going off the rails with a bunch of racist stuff. But it was a horrible, horrible day. It changed my life forever, as it did many people. Mine mostly for the fact that my boyfriend at the time actually joined the Army because of 9/11. So that kind of got me on the road to figuring out how our policies affect the world, blowback, and just that whole ball of yarn and can of worms, John.
It's interesting that you were listening to Howard Stern that morning because I was listening to him as well. And you're right. He was very, let's carpet bomb the Middle East and just get rid of everybody who's an Arab. And it was very, hateful. And you know what? On the day of 9/11, I was, or after 9/11, I was very much like that as well. So I understand the mindset. But obviously today, I don't agree with it at all. Anyway, what was the first thing that you questioned about 9/11?
So that was the day. And then the weeks following 9/11, I remember, of course, the media, looking back on it, I mean, it's absolutely vile. My brother and I collected all these like news weeks from the weeks after 9/11. I think my mom actually had them, and we found them in her attic. And I mean, they are just unbelievable propaganda. It is unreal. I mean, it's like dudes dressed in biohazard outfits saying like, this is the new America, like prepare yourself for the police state. I mean, that kind of stuff. Like, we live in a I mean, it was just, you know, every single page was just saying like, it's going to get worse, it's going to get crazier. Within minutes they had everything lined up of how 9/11 happened and why, which I thought was really interesting. I mean, of course, at the time, you know, this is all looking back on it now, but at the time I didn't think that was strange. I remember everyone got sucked into the media because that's when we first saw the media become a 24/7 news cycle. So they took advantage of that attack to basically create that 24/7 model. And so they were just filling it with time, filling it with just 24/7 disaster porn coverage, showing the buildings being blown up, showing the buildings falling, showing the buildings on fire, showing the planes hitting the buildings over and over and over again. I mean, thinking about that on a psychological level, like, man, what is that doing? What did that do to us? How did that traumatize us? Not only just the event itself, but then being brainwashed and propagandized to for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I mean, everyone was glued to their television sets for weeks, if not months. But I remember just thinking I just remember crying, thinking about the people that had to choose to jump out of the building or burn. And it's just such a horrible thing to think about still. But I guess the first thing that I started questioning about it, I mean, you know, I just was really anti-Bush. And once my boyfriend at the time joined the Army, and he was all about going to war and killing people and stuff, and I was like, this is awful because we have the Bush administration taking advantage of this tragedy and using it to go to war. So it wasn't until around 2005, I would say, that I just saw the first piece of footage, and it started with Unanswered Questions, the Guerrilla News Network video with Nafiz Ahmed and a couple other very credible journalists and scholars in there, and they were just talking about the air defense, and they just talked about why was it that the air defense failed so disastrously on this day. And I was just like, you know what, that is a really crazy question. And that was actually the first time I saw Nafiz Ahmed, and I was like, man, this guy is just super on point. So that planted the seed, because of course it all starts with the seeds. And then I think just a couple months later I saw Loose Change, and you know, of course Loose Change has serious problems, especially the first one. And it was just a bunch of guys getting together, throwing together research, you know. But there are morsels of truth that were really damning and definitely stood in contradiction to the official story. So, of course, if you watch that and if you're a critical thinker, you can discern, you know, here's something that I was lied to about that I didn't know about before. So kind of all of those things just started building up, and I was like, you know what, this is unbelievable that we don't know the truth about this horrific attack that has led us on a rampage of endless war and bloodlust. And then you start to ask, like, why? Why don't we know this? Why isn't the media covering this? And then it just opens that whole Pandora's box of, you know, just the complicity with across party lines and the whole corporate media establishment and apparatus and how they just work in conjunction to sell war. And it's just really devastating. But, you know, after finding out these facts about 9/11 and that we were lied to, and I remember going and trying to embed myself, like, as a citizen journalist back in the day, like in 2004, going and sitting in Greg Palast's lectures and, you know, trying to talk to Ralph Nader and stuff about it, and they just kind of shut me down. And I was just trying to bring up the fact that we were allies with bin Laden, and, like, you know, none of it made any sense to me, and I was just trying to, like, sort it through, but it was just kind of me shouting to the sky. Like, I didn't know where to go with it. And one day I saw this little booth at one of the events that I was going to, and it was a little booth with Nalise and Ted, and it said Stand Against 9/11 Truth, and I was like, oh my God! I was like, whoa, there's actually a group that is doing something about this. I was like, this is so cool. And so I went over and just, at that moment, I kind of became like the youth organizer for trying to get justice for the 9/11 victims' families, and worked with Nalise and Ted, and we did some really great events and brought a lot of attention to the cause. But you know what, John? I have a lot of regrets, too.
Right. You know, we all do. There are many things that I have done or promoted over the years that I have regrets about when I first came into the movement. Well, actually, it's interesting that you stumbled across this table and they were saying the same things you were saying, and questioning the same things you were, and you're like, oh my God, there are other people doing this. I had a very similar experience where I came into this all on my own. It was January 2002 when news of Bush and Cheney asking Tom Daschle to limit the scope of the investigations, and I asked, why would the president and vice president, of all people, not want to know exactly how this happened?
That's
so
weird.
To make sure it could never happen again. I couldn't understand that. So I paid a little bit more attention to 9/11, and then in May of 2002, news of the August 6th PDD came out, and as you know, we were told repeatedly that there were no warnings, that nobody had any idea that anything like this was going to happen, and then we had a warning, and so they lied. So I was off to the races at that point. But I never came across anybody in the 9/11 Truth Movement until June 2004, and I came across them. I used to watch the 9/11 Commission hearings after work late at night because they would be rebroadcasted. And one night they had 9/11 Citizens Watch holding a press conference. And for those who don't know, 9/11 Citizens Watch was a watchdog group that was watching over the 9/11 Commission, making sure they were doing their job. They were also working with the 9/11 Family Steering Committee. They were founded by Kyle Hintz and John Judge. And as soon as I saw that press conference, the very next day I called Kyle and said, what can I do to help? I couldn't believe there were other people, doing that stuff.
You know what? I just thought of something. The seed planted with with Fahrenheit 9/11. That's when the first seed planted, because that, I don't know, man. Maybe that was just like amidst the journey that I was like, what the hell is going on? Like with the whole Saudi, fly out of all the Saudi Arabian princes and stuff. So I was like, what is going on? I think Michael Moore did a good job kind of introducing the subject, but go on.
No, Michael Moore did a great job. In fact, I used to joke with people and say, if you look at Fahrenheit 9/11 and watch the scene where Andrew Card goes up to Bush and whispers in his ear, and imagine him saying that everything's going according to plan, that movie becomes a very different movie. Anyway, I don't think that's what happened. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Your first foray into activism, wasn't it to support John Kerry against Bush?
Yeah, so 9/11 stuff was not my first foray in activism. I started, it was the Iraq War lead up. I was taking sociology in class. This is when I first went to college now from high school. So high school I was kind of rudely awakened into holy shit. Oh, I'm sorry, can I swear?
You can say anything you want.
I was rudely awakened into, wow, there's something outside of my selfish existence that, is happening in the world. And so that was kind of my first, window into that. And then, of course, going to college, having my boyfriend be training to go to war, taking all these classes where I was like, whoa, the U.S. military is destroying the planet. Like, oh, my God. I mean, it was just like one after the other because it was like a fresh mind, it was like this tabula rasa. I had grown up in a Democratic family, but never kind of rudely awakened to the horrific effects of militarism, imperialism, hegemony. And I remember reading Chalmers Johnson book Blowback in Sociology 101, and I just became so obsessed with these microcosms and studies of what U.S. militarism has done to just different pockets of society across the planet. So that was just insane. And then through there, I got involved in Amnesty International, and I was trying to call attention to, like, human rights abuses and, of course, the civil liberties thing with the Patriot Act. And so all of these things were going on at the time, and I just started forming allies through these different groups. And then, once again, I was still wrapped up into the two-party paradigm. I still, didn't get it that the Democrats were complicit. And so at that time, I think the lead up to the 2004 election, I was just so upset with Bush, and I just wanted to do everything I could to make sure that John Kerry won, because wow, the country would be so much better if John Kerry were president, right? Um, so I went on the swing state trip for him. I mean, it was just embarrassing to talk about, but it's like we've all been there. You know, it all takes us that personal journey to figure out that it's a sham. And I went to Yuma, Arizona, which was so weird because I remember it was like 90% Republican, and I was like, why are we here? Like, who strategized this? Like, we're just wasting our time. And I remember every door would just get shut in my face. I mean, it was just like a really awful time.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
Well,
go for it.
Do you remember everybody came out in record numbers to vote against Bush, and he still won? It was just it was a dirty election, is what it.
Oh, I think it was totally no. It was completely stolen. I mean, Mark Crispin Miller has meticulously researched this in his book. The 2000 election, obviously, that was a ruse, right? Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decides our elections now. That's great. And then, the antiquated Electoral College bullshit. So then fast forward to 2004, John Kerry's like, we're going to have lawyers on the ground in Ohio. Give me your millions of dollars, everyone. I'm going to I'm going to go down fighting, blah, 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 blah. I remember earlier in the day, the exit polls, because obviously middle class, working class people vote after work. So that, it tends to be where more Democratic voters will actually come out after like 5 or 6. So earlier in the day, the exit polls were actually way in Kerry's favor. And I was like, this is an awesome sign, because even if they drastically flip like a couple percentage points, because that's really statistically only like the room margin of error. And I was like, and it obviously that more Democrats are going to vote later because they're getting off work and stuff. And the opposite happened, where the margin of error flipped to favor Bush later on. And I was like, something is wrong. I was like, this is absolutely not reality. I was like, something's going on. And I was like, you know what? Kerry will save the day. I was like, Kerry will come out and dispute this like charade. And then what happened? He conceded within the hour, and then he left. He literally just left for years, and then comes back, and he probably was told, I don't even know, this is just my conspiratorial mind, but he was probably like, look, dude, take the dive, come back, we'll give you the Secretary of State position.
Who knows? But it was so weird how he just conceded so quickly, and it seemed so dirty. But I want to get back to something you said about regrets. Now, I have promoted things, when I first came into the movement. That's what I wanted to say, is that I listened to people like Carl Schwartz, who said that he had video of a different kind of plane hitting the towers than what we were told. And, I told my friends at work about it, and when I found out he had nothing, I looked like an idiot in front of all those people. And, there were instances like that in the beginning. So I have regrets. So what kind of regrets do you have?
Man, I have a lot of regrets now, because as an activist, you're not thinking about journalistic integrity. You're not thinking about journalistic ethics. And I was just shouting from the rooftops, John. I was so pissed and angry that I would just go up to people and yell at them. I mean, I have so many regrets of how I acted as an activist, let alone the affiliations that I allowed myself to be, affiliated with to this day. And I'll get into that in a second. But I mean, just the tactics and strategies that I would use personally, really awful. It was all learning curve, but at the same time, I mean, I got like jumped in front of a Padres game holding a sign saying Question 9/11 by a bunch of guys. And I think it was at that point that I realized that I needed to rethink my approach. I was like, why am I standing outside of a Padres game in San Diego with thousands of drunk, probably Army people, with a sign that's saying Question 9/11? It's like, am I trying to get jumped? Am I asking for this? I mean, I know you're never asking to get hurt, but it was just like I was provoking an unnecessary like provocation. You know what I mean? It didn't make any sense what I was doing. So all of those things I regret. I regret linking up with people who were total frauds. I mean, there was a point during my anti-war activism that I was so burnt out that anyone who would come into the group, I would just be so grateful that there was like new energy. And there was a total fraudster who ended up like using me to sell shirts and say that he was giving money to the 9/11 victims' family members and firefighters who were dying, and I was going around allowing myself to be affiliated with this person, and he turned out to be a complete fraudster and liar and never gave a dime to the first responders. So I was then like tainted by my relationship with him, and so that was one horrible thing. And then you know, a lot of people in the group, like for example Webster Tarpley, I mean, God, if I could take one thing back, it would probably be having anything to do with that person. He is he's a disgrace. He's terrible. There's so many people who I regret even affiliating with, or like, I mean, Alex Jones. Right. Alex Jones and Webster Tarpley. I mean, it's really unfortunate, John, because
it's sad because when somebody who questions 9/11, you know, on their own, they get into this on their own, and they go on the internet, and when they type in 9/11 truth or whatever, they get pummeled with the prisonplanet.com or Infowars.com, and they start to listen to what people like that are saying, because it kind of goes along the lines of your mindset. But you know, I want to talk about this guy you mentioned, that got you into the T-shirts thing. Just so everybody knows, I was a very big, or am a very big advocate for the 9/11 first responders, and I was, you know, working with the Feel Good Foundation, and I heard from John that, you know, they never got money from this one organization who said they were going to give $1 for every T-shirt sold,
which is nothing. And also, it's like
right, it's nothing. And you know, I called Abby, and Abby, out of her own pocket, sent money to the Feel Good Foundation to resolve that issue. So that's the kind of person that Abby is.
Oh, John. It's just embarrassing, you know? And another thing that embarrassed me, and this is what obviously we're going to talk about next, which is the whole Crimea upset and what was exposed afterward. But, you know, at that time I was so sure of everything in my worldview. I thought that I had all the answers. My mind was like a sponge. I was very invested in my own preconceived notions about what I thought 9/11 was and who I thought was responsible. So I, being in that like very juvenile mindset, was basically saying it was an inside job. You know, I was going out there saying it was an inside job, and I was also just really just, you know, saying that the buildings were blown up, saying like I didn't know what happened at the Pentagon, all this stuff. I mean, obviously I didn't know. And I still don't know. I do think that a plane hit the Pentagon. I don't know. I mean, the buildings thing, I totally have zero like professional opinion on that, because I am not an expert in the field. I think it's definitely strange about Building 7, but I'm not going to sit here as a journalist and say this is what happened. This is how it happened. All I can do is ask questions about what doesn't make sense to me and the things that we can prove. And so back in the day, back in like 2005 and 6, I mean, I was just running around saying all this stuff, not thinking about, hey, like, this is actually really irresponsible. And not only is it irresponsible, it turns people off, because it's completely batshit insane for you to run up to someone and be like, did you know the buildings were blown up on 9/11? It's like, holy shit, that's crazy. Stop. Now when I see people doing that, I'm like, you need to seriously stop. I'm like, because if you care about the truth about 9/11, like, you need to focus on what's provable. And it's like so weird, because I was that person 10 years ago, but I just didn't know, and I was young, and I was immature, and I was completely ignorant of how the world actually works. And it was obviously before I moved to D.C. and saw, the government, you know, how it really operates, like the giant bureaucracy that we live under, and really the nuts and bolts of that. So I regret all of that. I don't adhere to it anymore. I said things that I do not stand by today. And I hate when people look at politicians and they're like, he's a flip-flopper. Well, you know what? If you're not changing your views, then you're not evolving as a human. Like, I give tons of leeway to people who change their opinions. I said stuff on air a year ago that I regret, like, that I changed my opinion on today. It's constant change. Life is constant evolution. You have to admit that you were wrong. You have to admit your mistakes. And it's just really, I just regret a lot of things that I said, especially on camera. I should have stuck with what I knew in my heart was true, which is that we were lied to. Here's what we were lied to about, and here's why we need justice.
Oh, I definitely got burned over the years promoting the work of others, thinking that it was credible, and it wasn't. You know, with regards to the buildings, there's nothing wrong with questioning how those buildings came down. I mean, that's where the majority of the people were murdered that day.
Right.
But, you know, when you admit that you don't know what happened on 9/11 or who was ultimately responsible, it makes you a better advocate for 9/11 justice. It really does. You know, when you ask good questions of people, when you plant good seeds, that's what you want to be doing. You don't want to be pushing people away. And, you know, the corporate media spent years trying to depict us as people who think that there was a controlled demolition, that a missile hit the Pentagon, that Flight 93 was shot down, that there was a stand-down order, that there were no hijackers, that the planes were remote controlled. I mean, the media spent a long time depicting us as that. So then when people go out and act exactly as the media who is trying to attack us, you know, if they go out and act exactly as they portray us, they're not really helping. So
no, 100%.
anyway.
No, 100%. You just hit it on the head, and it was like reality manifesting itself. It was like you know what I mean? It was like the media put out this narrative, and then all the quote unquote truth activists just became that.
Right.
And unfortunately, today you see all of these like newbie idiot assholes that are jumping on board, and all they do is talk about Israel and the buildings, and it's like, you guys need to shut the fuck up, seriously, because A, you have no idea what damage you're doing. B, where have you been for the last 10 years? Why don't you try to get in from the beginning? And then,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, do not tell me, you know, all these people saying that I'm a sellout and stuff. It's like, you guys can seriously go F yourselves, because you have no idea what we've been through from the beginning. People like you and I, and, you know, all the family members, and the family members would be disgusted by these tactics and behaviors of some of these trolls, and they basically might as well be working for the government. They're basically doing the same damage that a government
The results
troll
are the
is doing.
same.
Exactly. They're muddying the waters. They are poisoning the well. They're changing the goalpost all over the place. And honestly, those kinds of people made me want to distance myself, because it's so bad, because they've tainted it so much that it's like, you can't even talk about 9/11 now without people saying, oh, so you believe that space beams blew up the towers? And you're like, what?
Exactly.
Like, what are you talking about? I'm just saying that there were warnings.
Well, and you spoke about evolving, and I've done the same thing. I've tried to distance myself from that group of people over the years. I've changed from saying I'm a 9/11 truther to being an advocate for 9/11 justice. You know, and my book is called 9/11 Truther, and that's only because I coined the phrase, and I thought it would be controversial, and I thought a lot of people would buy it because of the controversy, but that didn't happen. But it's the first thing I address in my book. You know, how it's been depicted and so forth. Now, is there anything that you did as an advocate for 9/11 justice that you're proud of?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'd organize, you know, Cosmos started that 11th, or I think it was like you and a bunch of other people started that day of action, and so we did that every week. We got so much. I mean, we were one of the biggest groups in the country because of my tireless, and Elise and Ted's tireless work. Laura, I mean, we were out there every single day, you know, just doing outreach. We did an amazing, like, thousands of people marched through Balboa Park. Was one of the most gratifying days of my life, because I was just really proud of the diverse group of families and everyone from all walks of life marching for this cause, which was that we were lied to, and that, you know, 9/11 victims' families deserve answers and justice, and that was just really, really gratifying for me. And of course, just meeting everyone in the movement, and meeting John Fiel, and just being around people who really care was just a really gratifying thing. It really helped shape me as a person. I learned a lot, it was also scary because you see how these kinds of movements gravitate toward where they just are all encompassing. So now every conspiracy, it's like the same kind of people just gravitate to the next one. And that's what
Right.
was kind of sad to me, is that I thought that this movement was based on facts. I thought it was based on really credible research that contradicted what we've been told. But unfortunately, about, I'd say like 80% of the people that I was around just kind of got sucked up into the next quote unquote whatever, you know?
Well, I think a lot of that had to do with what I call the conspiracy theory industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like Alex Jones, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
He'll talk about 9/11, but he'll also talk about all kinds of other things, and
Mm-hmm.
people pick up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very focused on 9/11. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you did a segment once on your show when something bad happens, the people come out of the woodwork within hours
Mm-hmm.
to say that it was a false flag attack. And, you know, we have a hard enough time convincing people that we were lied to about 9/11. We don't need to be the boy who cried wolf. You know, that makes it even harder.
And that's
And
exactly
plus
what all these
it's
people
irresponsible.
became.
Huh?
And so that's exactly what all these people became.
Yep. It's sad, and, you know, it's unfortunate. I don't know what to tell people, but, you know, the world is a chaotic place, and guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Sometimes shit really does happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not always a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring more credibility to yourself. You know, question everything, but
Mm-hmm.
do so responsibly. Anyway, when you famously spoke out against Russia invading Crimea, who came out of the woodwork to attack you, and what did they use to attack you?
This was a horrible moment of my life, but it was the only reason it was horrible is because it came so quickly. But I guess that's the way life works, is you can never predict when the smear is going to come. I knew that the day would come where people would resurrect my 9/11 truth past. Obviously, like it's not like I've been hiding it. I talked about it openly on the show multiple times. But I had changed, obviously, my strategy, which is because I realized that I don't know what really happened, so I can't claim to know what happened. All I can do is ask questions. So, of course, I knew that there was footage of me back in the dizzy day, saying some shit that I don't stand by today. But, you know, lo and behold, of course, I speak out against the Crimea thing, and it was this amazing kind of moment because, A, it brought all this attention to RT, B, it kind of gave this credibility to my show, and it was just a really great thing because I was like, look, I've carved out this editorial freedom on a Russian network speaking out against Russia, and like so at that point, like RT couldn't fire me, and then the mainstream media had to like pay attention to RT, so it was like a really great thing. But of course, the establishment can't have that. And
Right.
so you have the neocons who are still very, very here. Like they didn't go away. They just rebranded themselves just like Blackwater. So they are still working behind the scenes ferociously to try to hijack narratives. They have all these letters that they publish to try to shape foreign policy, and the Tom Cotton letter, et cetera. So the Project for New American Century, which I'm sure people are listening to this know what that think tank was, with all the Bush crew, and so it's now the FPI. And so after the statement, the next morning I woke up to this amazing article written by Glenn Greenwald about, you know, this is what it means to have editorial independence, and this is like really cool what Abby did, and da-da-da. Then that night, so I was like on cloud nine all day. I was like, this is amazing, like people like get it, you know. And then that night, Jamie Kirchick, a very interesting person in DC. He's a gay neocon. He's like a performance artist. He's like a James O'Keefe type dude, the guy who dresses a pimp and tried to like go on Planned Parenthood. Like this guy disrupts things. He's a disruptor. He doesn't actually believe what he's doing, but he's like Bill Kristol's like little henchman. So he also was a state propagandist. He worked for Radio Free Europe, which is under the umbrella of the Broadcasting Board of Governors, the U.S. State Department apparatus, which is kind of the counterpart of RT, except it has tens of millions of dollars more in funding. So he goes on Lawrence O'Donnell's show that night and just trash talks me the whole time. Like it was amazing because Lawrence O'Donnell didn't even ask me to come on. So what I thought was curious was that they asked Jamie Kirchick to come on Mind you, this is MSNBC, which is supposed to be like a liberal-leaning, you know what I mean? So
Right.
it's like, why would they didn't even ask me to come on for an interview. Instead, they asked this like performance artist troll with 0 followers here to come on just to bash what I did. So it kind of goes in line with like, you know, this 2-party selling of the narrative, which is like Russia as this enemy. So they can't dare have RT gain any sort of credibility. So I thought that was really insane. And what the guy was saying was fucking awful. I mean, he was saying that I was crazy, I was a lunatic, I was a conspiracy theorist, I think that 9/11 was an inside job, da-da-da. So I was just like, damn, well, here it comes. Like, I knew at that point, I was like, and here it comes. And this is going to be the beginning of the avalanche. And lo and behold, I remember waking up the next day to New York Times, Raw Story, BuzzFeed, Glenn Greenwald praises Abby Martin, and then New York Times outs her as a 9/11 truther. Like, that's like the kind of like bizarre, like buzzwordy headlines, you know. And I was like, well, and I just like tuned it out. I was like, you know what? I just got to ride the storm, man. I just got to ride it. Like, knew this was coming. And what was so fascinating was that it had nothing to do with what I did. It was just a way to just delegitimize me. It was like, wow. Great. So, like, yeah, I question things that we're told about 9/11, which, by the way, we've been lied to about every single impetus of war in the history of fucking war. So if you're telling me that we weren't lied to about 9/11, then you're an idiot. So I'm sorry that I just question what the government tells me, because they lied to us about everything. So, yeah, sorry, that makes me a critically thinking American. And the rest of the people in the world agree, even though Americans have their heads under a freaking rock about this thing. It's like this holy grail.
With regards to I'm sorry. When you spoke out against Russia, first of all, at the time I didn't know if Russia actually invaded Crimea or if they just activated troops that they already had in the Black Sea, and that was one of the first times I really, you know, took notice to the propaganda wars that were going on, and realized that I really had no idea what was going on.
Right.
So it was that incident that, you know, caused that for me. But I didn't understand. You were essentially saying exactly what the corporate media of America was saying, that Russia invaded, they shouldn't have. So why would they come out to attack you? And you explained it yourself. Because it brought credibility to a Russian network, which they couldn't have.
And because I called out the U.S. in the statement. So they all used a very small clip of the statement where I was just calling out Russia. But I also called out the entire U.S. media apparatus. I called out the political establishment for its, incursion, NATO incursion and buildup. So, and I said I was disgusted with all sides. And that doesn't bode well for the narrative either, because that would implicate them. And so once I think they kind of realized, they had no idea who I was. Of course, the news doesn't think. They just want the story first. So they all picked up the story before knowing anything about me. And once they realized I was a pretty controversial figure who mostly spent my time trashing, like, criminal activity from our government and exposing, like, war crimes, then they kind of got a little bit scared, and, you know, so they had to find a reason to take me down. And then of course I made a statement saying, like, I don't think 9/11 was an inside job, because here's the thing, I don't come out there and say, this is what happened. When I hear inside job, that is an insanely, on purpose, loaded term to marginalize people who are questioning 9/11 and to undercut what we're trying to say. So I tried to explain that I actually lucidly tried to explain that, and I posted a statement on Blogger, because I knew that people were going to fucking freak out and be like, she's a Charlie Veitch. And I wanted to be like, look, here's the deal. I am saying this because of this, because I'm a journalist and I'm a professional, and I think that this term is actually super damaging. And also, I think multiple governments might have been involved. So how could you say it was an inside job?
Exactly.
That makes no sense.
To me, the phrase 9/11 was an inside job. When people go around saying that, they may as well be screaming that Elvis is alive.
Exactly.
You know, that's how it reaches people. With regards to Robert Mackey, He wrote a blog.
That's the guy who I was talking about.
Right. He's the guy who wrote the blog in the New York Times, and he called it Russia Today Host Has Roots in 9/11 Truth Movement. And I asked Robert Mackey about it, and he said it was. I said, why did you attack Abby Martin? And he said it wasn't an attack. But as I've pointed out several thousand times, the phrase 9/11 truth or 9/11 truther has been made the equivalent of a baby killer or a dog torturer. So if you link someone to that in the media, it's not to make them a hero. It's the exact opposite.
And look at what they say about like Sandy Hook truther. Like that's everything's a truther now.
Exactly. And you know, the way they attacked you, there are different ways that big names or people with voices get attacked. And you know, there have been people like Cynthia McKinney, Richard Falk, Van Jones, Kevin Bracken, Rosie O'Donnell. The list goes on. And, you know, when a celebrity has spoken out about 9/11, they've been attacked in unison by the corporate media. What they did to you was kind of like what I call a Van Jones. They looked into your past and found you questioned 9/11 at one time and used that against you. Do you remember what they did to Van Jones? And I'm not a fan of Van Jones.
Oh, yeah.
But they got him out of the Obama administration because he signed a statement years ago in 2004 advocating for 9/11 justice. So
unbelievable.
You know, and this is, I think, one of the reasons why people with a voice won't address the lies of 9/11, because they don't want to be painted with the 9/11 truth brush. They don't want to lose their pulpits. And, you know, these attacks are a big reason why, I think.
Oh, John, I can guarantee you that's why. I've lived in D.C. now for 3 years. I've talked to dozens of journalists, lobbyists, State Department people about this issue. And I will guarantee you that half of them, off the record, will agree with me. That's what's so amazing. I even talked to this in Guantanamo Bay, of all places. I was with an AP reporter, seasoned AP reporter who was there at the beginning. I mean, he was on the ground in the Haiti earthquake. He was there when the first prisoners were brought to Gitmo. I mean, this dude is like really baller. And he's the one who brought it up, oddly enough, and we're just sitting at this table, and he brings up, you know, just questions that he had about 9/11, and he was like, you know, it got to a point where I had to stop. He was like, because I realized that I couldn't do my job if I didn't believe what the government was telling us about 9/11. And I was like, dude, that not only is it avoiding the third rail, like, you know, a lot of people avoid Israel because they know it's not good for their career. Not only is this like the ultimate third rail issue, which is that you just don't touch 9/11, but I think that people honestly psychologically can't, especially if you're working remotely near the establishment. But, I mean, hearing what this guy said and talking to just dozens of people here, everyone agrees. It's just that who's going to take the risk? They're not going to go out there then and be like, all right, like, now I'm going to do a story about it. No. They just agree off the record silently and they move on. Like, they're not going to risk their careers, and they also, in the case of this AP guy, didn't even want to go there.
Well, I've risked so much. I'm a nobody, and I've risked everything for this. And it boggles my mind that people like, you know, Chris Hedges, Noam Chomsky, Glenn Greenwald they'll talk about everything else in the post-9/11 world, but they won't talk about the fact that we were lied to about the event that justifies that world. And it just boggles my mind. One of the other attacks,
because to them is they think it's a moot point, John. They think it's a moot point because it's done. All we could focus on now is what's to come. But the problem is that when you're omitting that worldview and the realistic implications of actual state crimes against democracy, which is what Lance DeHaven Smith talks about in his book, that is omitting a huge portion of our reality. And that is really damaging because it's going to happen again. And we need to acknowledge facts, as hard as it may be. Otherwise, we're not doing our job as journalists.
they're able to write the history, and they're writing a history that is simply wrong. It's damaging.
Right.
You know, the myth of 9/11 is dangerous to everyone on the planet. The truth about 9/11, from what I gather, is dangerous only to a few.
Exactly.
And you know, they need to start addressing this. It terrifies me that children go to school and they learn about 9/11, but they don't learn really about 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And so they grow up with this myth about 9/11 that is just wrong, and that's so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let me see. I'm looking over the questions.
Yeah, the whole Crimea thing was so sad because, you know, here I was trying to do something really good. You know, I was like trying to like stay true to my moral compass. I was like really just trying to start this dialogue how we shouldn't be reactionary, we shouldn't be pro-Russia, we shouldn't be pro-U.S. We should really like discern that everything's very convoluted and like militarism is bad, and the way that both countries were going about it was disagreeable in my point. And then of course the entire narrative just got shaped so that I'm a crazy lunatic for questioning 9/11, and I was like, whoa, this is so typical because I've seen this happen so many times. I saw it happen to Ron Paul. I saw it happen to Van Jones. Like you've seen it happen, and then when it was happening to me, it was just sad because I was like, this is just so sad because people. It's like my message got lost. You know, my original message got lost, and what are we even talking about?
The other thing that was sad was because of the fact that you defended yourself and evolved and stopped using language that doesn't help this cause, you got attacked by members of the so-called 9/11 truth movement. You know, and I say shame on them. Shame on the people that attacked you, because, my God, how many times on your show have you addressed the 9/11 issue?
I probably did about 12 interviews about it at least. And monologues, and the Rachel Maddow thing, Kevin Ryan, you, I mean, everyone. I tried to touch it as much as I could.
Exactly. You brought more attention to the 9/11 issue than anybody else on the television.
Of course.
So how dare they come out and attack you for trying to defend yourself? That they should be ashamed of themselves. And they do. As far as I'm concerned, everybody that did that owes you an apology. Now, people that question the 9/11 attacks as a whole have been misrepresented, attacked, slandered by much of the corporate media for years. And why do you think that is?
Well, it's pretty obvious, but I think it can, if you want to trace it back to a historical nature, I think you can look at the Warren Commission. Because the CIA, and this is another thing that Lance Davidson talks about, the CIA actually had a campaign that's traceable that infiltrated the media, not only with Operation Mockingbird and, you know, the Cold War stuff, but to discredit the term conspiracy theory and to muddy the water about people who are questioning the Warren Commission. So this was back in the day, and it just worked with wonders, I think. And it started to shape this kind of dueling reality in this country where we always project these, you know, political assassinations or, you know, foreknowledge of events or outright false flags or manufactured war pretenses in other countries. But if you ever question that here, then you're a lunatic. And it really does come from ethnocentrism, it comes from American exceptionalism, and it comes from this kind of brainwashing media campaign that was in conjunction with the CIA back in the 60s. And it's just permeated so much that we live in a society now where we can't even talk about facts.
Right.
And people are so scared that it's not that journalists aren't thinking about it. It's not that they don't care. It's that they know the way the system works, and they just know that they can't touch it, and they've known that since the beginning. So why would they come out now and break that mold?
After 9/11, you know, a lot of people said a lot of journalists say they dropped the ball because they didn't want to come across as unpatriotic and
exactly.
And so on and so forth. And I think that's true for some people, but then there's what you were talking about. Now, there were journalists that did openly question 9/11. One of them was Robert Shear from the L.A. Times, who wrote an article called "What We Don't Know About 9/11 Hurts Us," and it wasn't long after he wrote that he was gone from the L.A. Times, and he started his site TruthDig. So that was one reason why, journalists don't cover the issue. They don't want to lose their jobs.
They also don't want to be called, it's not only that. I just thought of this. I mean, remember after 9/11 when Bush was, saying that, he immediately started talking about conspiracy theories and how insane people were. I mean, they knew from the beginning that they needed to get that out there real quick. So they tainted the water immediately and made it outlandish for anyone to question anything that they were doing. And they were so untransparent and secretive that it was of course theories are going to pop up. You couldn't be any more secretive about everything that's going on. But of course, if we question anything that you're saying, then we're crazy. So I think it was this it was like the burning tires thing. It was exactly what Dan Rather said. It was just like South Africa. You were basically symbolically lynched. You were a burning tire thrown around your neck and you were just hung out to dry. And that's the culture and climate of fear, that you didn't question a single thing. And not only with 9/11, but that's obviously how we got into Iraq too. And it lasts till this day with this kind of compliance and unquestioning stenography going on. The Richard Engel thing, this NBC journalist who said that he was kidnapped by Assad's forces, and then it turns out he was kidnapped by the rebels, and NBC lies on behalf of the State Department to sell a war. This is the reality we're living in now, John.
Well, Bob McElveen, 9/11 family member Bob McElveen, was approached by a Philadelphia paper, and they wanted to report on his story, and I think they ultimately said, actually no, the reporter was a friend of his son's, and they wanted to do a story, and they said to him that the Pentagon would never allow this to run. So I thought that was very interesting.
That is very odd. It's so weird.
What do you have to say to people who have a voice, who speak about issues pertaining to the 9/11 world, but don't address the fact that we were lied to about 9/11?
I'll say two things about that. The first is that to the people who do agree with us and are scared, look, what I've realized coming out of this entire experience for me, which is growing, evolving, changing my opinions, solidifying my beliefs, but also staying true to the fact that we were lied to and I still want justice, and I think that what we were told was complete bullshit. Coming out of that stronger than I ever have because of the support of tens of thousands of people, not only here but around the world, John. Anyone who's traveled outside of this country knows no one else in the world buys this shit. Everyone has questions. Everyone knows that we were lied to. And people here support it. And they stood with me. And the people who are true and they know what's going on, they see through it. So I would only say that you have the majority of people on your side. It's just that the media doesn't let it. No, they don't show it. So you feel like you're isolated in this belief. You feel like you're insane. You're like, wow, am I crazy? But you're not. The majority of people agree with you.
Exactly.
And so, and that's a beautiful thing. And it's so beautiful because I came out of this whole experience being reaffirmed that I'm on the right side of history, and that everyone really appreciated, that, people like you and I haven't stood down, and we still remain true and stuff like that. And they appreciate that we're out there saying this stuff because they feel like maybe they can't. But to the people who do not address the lies about 9/11, who continue to talk about just everything that happened in the post-9/11 world, once again, it's just you're not addressing a realistic view of how the political establishment works. And I'm not even talking about all that crazy shit. I don't believe in the Illuminati. I don't believe in the New World Order. I don't believe in any of that stuff. And that's not where your mind needs to go if you're talking about that there might have been inside complicity in terms of Cheney leaving the back door open. That's not what I'm talking about. And we need to differentiate between a vast criminal conspiracy of unnamed, not seen people in a smoky room with just people out in the blue.
Well, we know people have lied. We know documented. We have documented lies, and none of those people were held accountable.
Exactly.
You know, why can't they
Exactly.
talk about that? And you know, they're afraid. We spoke about how they're afraid of being painted with the 9/11 truth brush and losing their pulpits. But I guarantee, because of what you said, that if they started to address even the slightest bit the fact that we were lied to about 9/11, I guarantee that the people that follow them would multiply exponentially. And so they wouldn't lose their pulpits. If anything, their pulpits would grow.
It's just really sad because a lot of these scholars, you know, a lot of these like philosophers talk about the conventional wisdom, and they really eviscerate the concept of American exceptionalism, but then they still adhere to that by not addressing the clear fact that we were lied to, and clearly someone from inside the establishment knew. That really bothers me, because that's almost this ethnocentric like projection on like, oh, but still our government wouldn't allow that to happen. At least that's what they're putting out there. Even if they disagree with that personally, that's what their work tells people. And that, I think, is really damaging.
What I told Jonathan Kay is, you know, our elected officials are human beings just like you and I. They're capable of greed, they're capable of jealousy, they're capable of murder, and every other horrible thing that human beings are capable of doing. Don't put these people on a pedestal. You know, it's their actions. You know, I look at 9/11 as a crime, not as an act of war. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And along with people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11 by their own actions. You know, it's not like we made this shit up. It was their own actions that gave them this title. So it would be irresponsible of us as citizens to ignore that truth, I think. And the fact that, you know, even if you don't think they've earned the title of suspect, there are many lies out there that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So I think it's irresponsible if you don't, especially if you have a voice. Okay, my last question. What are your plans for the future, and is there anything that you would like to promote at this time?
Plans for the future is I'm trying to figure out my next moves. So starting a show, but I'm not going to give away anything yet. It'll either be independent or hosted by a network, trying to figure that out. But in the meantime, I'm doing regular podcast and article postings on MediaRoots.org, which is my citizen journalism project that's been ongoing for about a decade now. And then I am also just participating in stuff. I'm finally able to go out and, you know, be a part of forums and protests and stuff, so it's fun to not be trapped in a studio and trying to either move to LA or New York. So a lot of exciting things ahead. Everyone stay tuned. Check out my art as well, abbymartin.org, and my brother and I's podcast on SoundCloud.
Who did that piece of artwork, the new Media Roots logo thing that I saw?
So that's my friend
cool.
Leo, who runs a lab in Ventura. It's really amazing. He's great.
Oh, it's excellent. And I love what you and Robbie do with your podcast. When I listened to your Gitmo show, I cried. When you cried, I mean, it was very touching. And again, Abby, I'm really just so proud of you for everything that you've done over the years. And I want to thank you very much for everything that you've done. And I want to wish you well in all of your future endeavors. I hope you smash another television.
I don't think it'll be the last one. I think I'll definitely have more to smash. John, thank you so much for all of your tireless work and just for staying true to the message this whole time in the face of so much bullshit. And I just really admire your steadfastness and really appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you very much, Abby, and good luck with all of your future endeavors. And thank you very much for taking the time today to come on the show.
Thank you so much, John.